It was an honor never given to any other African-American male. I couldn't go to Washington and just do it like an ordinary white congressman would do. I had to write the book. I had to set a standard.
What does the name Stokes mean to you? Is it this? Or perhaps this? Or is it this, or this, or this? If you're a native Clevelander over the age of 50, you'll probably remember the pioneering brothers who broke down racial barriers in local politics. But if you're younger, Stokes may only be a name on a sign, many signs around town.
Oftentimes we've heard from young people that they know Carl and Louis Stokes as names on buildings. They don't have a real connection to them.
Susan Hall is curator of a new exhibit at the Western Reserve Historical Society that chronicles the careers of retired U.S. Congressman Louis Stokes and his late brother Carl, who made the history books as the first African-American mayor of a major U.S. city. Arnold Pinckney ran successful political campaigns for both Carl and Louis Stokes in the late 1960s.
Lou was more low-key. Lou was more like the person that was behind the scene. He was an outstanding lawyer, and I don't think that he ever thought about being anything else but a lawyer, really. I don't think that he had any ambitions for a political career. But Carl's, ambition was to become a politician and to hold political office.
Susan Hall says there was a woman behind that ambition.
Their mother is a major factor in who they became. Unfortunately, she was widowed early in their lives, and they were little boys, and she raised them essentially as a single parent, and she was a domestic. And it was difficult during those days to earn a living and raise your children. But she did, and she instilled in them this incredible amount of pride, and as she repeatedly said, and we have it throughout the exhibit, to be somebody.
One of Lou Stokes' first big victories was convincing the U.S. Supreme Court that Cleveland area congressional district borders had been drawn to dilute the influence of the African-American vote. As a result, the 21st District was redrawn to more accurately represent the East Side's black population, and Louis Stokes became that district's and Ohio's first black representative in Washington.
The 30 years that he was in Congress, I don't think I know of any other congressman in this country that has done more for his district than Lou Stokes. I don't know of any other congressman in this country that probably has more buildings named after him than Lou Stokes, and that's because of the contribution that he made.
Congressman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I want to start a few years ago, in 1998, as you were coming to the end of a role which pretty much defined your life for the 30 years before it. I'm thinking of a picture that's in the exhibit on the front page of the Plain Dealer. It's on January 18th, 1998. And I'm wondering what kinds of thoughts and feelings were kind of swirling through your mind as those days were unfolding.
Well, you're talking of the day that I announced that I was retiring from Congress. Yes. It was a day of real mixed feelings. I had just completed, or was about to complete, 30 years of public service on behalf of the residents of what was at one time the 21st Congressional District of Ohio, and secondly, the 11th Congressional District of Ohio. It was an honor never given to any other African-American male. Even today, I'm the only African-American male who has ever been elected to Congress in the state. And so as I stood there, I had some very mixed feelings about the great honor that had been accorded me by the people of the 11th Congressional District to represent them in the Congress during those years. At the same time, I felt that I'd had a legal career, I'd had a legislative career, and I wanted at this stage of my life to sort of step back, spend more time with my family and my grandchildren, and to also be active and do some of the kinds of things that I am doing today but at a different pace. But I can tell you, it was tough to be able to stand there that day and say, as the newspaper said, end of the Stokes era.
And on that note, your brother was a pioneer as the first black mayor of Cleveland, and you were a pioneer as the first black man in Congress from Ohio. I'm thinking about the pressures you might have felt, both of you, from yourselves and from others, being the firsts in those categories.
Well, it's different when you're a pioneer. For instance, I couldn't really go to Congress and just be an ordinary congressman. Firstly, at the time I went to Congress in January of 1969, the day I was sworn in, there were only 6 black congressmen who had already been seated in the Congress. And that day it made 9 of us when Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman who was elected from New York, Bill Clay, first black congressman from Missouri, took their seats with me, made a total of 9. And that was a very historic moment in America. It was the first time since 1875, 1877, the post-Reconstruction period, that you'd had more than 7 blacks in the United States House of Representatives. And so I recognized that this was a particular moment in history, and that I had a very special role to fulfill. At the same time, I realized that I had to set a certain standard. I couldn't go to Washington and just do it like an ordinary white congressman would do. I had to write the book. I had to set a standard so that whoever came behind me would have a standard by which they could live and operate in the Congress. And so, in essence, I wrote the book.
Yeah. Before you got around to writing that book, I'm thinking of a letter that is very near us as we sit here. It was written by you to your brother Carl around the time of the May primary in 1998. And there's a line where you say you have mixed feelings about that, about winning the primary and about perhaps going on to win the election because you felt that he should have been in that place. Was there, was it his plan to move on from the mayor's office to Congress, and did something stand in the way?
Well, that's another historic point that many people don't realize. When Carl was elected to the Ohio State Legislature, he was the first black Democrat to ever be elected to Ohio's legislature. And then he became a very prominent member of the state legislature, very charismatic, and he was so popular that it was assumed that he might want to try to go to Congress. And of course, there were people in the state that felt that he should not go to Congress. And so what they did, the same legislature in which he served, redistricted the 21st Congressional District in a way where they gerrymandered it. It took all of the black population and spread it around the county in such a way as to dilute a black base in that 21st district. And that would prevent him from being able to have the base he would need to get elected. And so Carl came to Cleveland and asked the NAACP to file a lawsuit against the same legislature he was serving in. I was the NAACP's lawyer. So they gave me the case. I had a group of lawyers who worked with me on the Legal Redress Committee, and we filed a lawsuit. We tried the lawsuit here in local courts. We took it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. We won the case in the United States Supreme Court. And, but in the meanwhile, Carl had gone from being a state legislator to being elected the mayor of Cleveland. And so the day that we won the case, I went to him and I said, listen, we just won your case in the United States Supreme Court. You can go to Congress. He said, I don't want to go to Congress. He said, I'm mayor of Cleveland. And his picture was on the front page, on the front cover of Time magazine. He was being heralded all over the nation, internationally, for his achievement at being America's first black mayor of a major American city. And so everybody in town, when they found out Carl wasn't running, they decided this was their time to go to Congress. And so people came to me, and particularly NAACP people, and said, well, Lou, it's your work that created the district. Why don't you run for Congress? I consulted with Carl and other NAACP people and consulted with Arnold Pinckney to see if he would be willing to be my campaign manager if I ran, and he said that he would. And so we made the decision then that I should run, but it really was Carl's seat.
I want to take you back farther now and see if we can sort of trace the path and the upbringing that brought you to all of the things we just talked about. You grew up in Cleveland with your brother Carl, and your mother raised you as a single parent after your father passed away. Mm-hmm. When you think about growing up and you think about your mother, what are the qualities of hers that you can look at yourself and say, I saw that in her and I took it as my own?
Well, firstly, my mother only had an 8th grade education. She came from Georgia, as a part of that out-migration of African Americans from the South in the early part of that century, anywhere from 1918 through 1927 to 28, when you had the largest part of the out-migration. Those were people like my mother, who all she could look forward to with an 8th grade education in Alabama was picking cotton. She wanted something better for herself in her life. And so she ventured out as a single woman and came to Cleveland, and here she met my dad. My dad may have had less education than she had. He was a laundry worker. And so, and he was 28 years old, he died, leaving Carl and I was 3 years old, Carl was a year old. And here's this lady, widowed woman, who has an 8th grade education, who hired herself out as a domestic, meaning she went out in suburban parts of Cleveland where she hired herself out as a domestic worker. She scrubbed floors. She cleaned their clothes. She washed their dishes, cleaned their homes in order to make a living for me and Carl. She found it tough to do so, so she also went on welfare. And then, finding it still tough, she moved into public housing to try and get a lower rent so she could have a decent home for us, but at the same time be able to have a little more income. And she constantly said to us, get an education, get something in your head so you don't have to work with your hands like I've worked with my hands all of my life. And I never really understood what she was saying until one night she was very sick. And I heard her moaning and groaning in the bedroom. And so I went into the bedroom, and the room was dark. And I just reached over, I sat in a chair, and I reached over and I took both of her hands and I held them, trying to give her some solace. And as I felt those hard, calloused hands from scrubbing people's floors in order to give me an education, I began to understand what she was talking about when she said, get something in your head so you don't have to work with your hands like I've worked with my hands. And so I did go on and finish high school, and that was her greatest dream. She could never send us to college. She didn't have money to send us to college, but she felt if we got a high school diploma, we had a chance to have a little better life than she had had. It broke her heart when Carl dropped out of East Tech High School at the age of 16. And I was in service. I'd been drafted in World War II. And she wrote me a letter, and she was very disheartened by his dropping out of school. And of course, as you know, Carl did. When he came out of the service, he saw I had gone out to Case Western Reserve, took advantage of the GI Bill of Rights to go to college. And he came out, and at the age of 21, He went back to East Tech, got his high school diploma, and then, of course, the rest is history.
As you talk about your brother, there's that smile on your face and an obvious, the love that still goes back and forth. I've heard you describe him as someone special. You knew that at an early age, charismatic, attractive, but it always also made me wonder how you saw yourself.
Well, it's true. Carl, all the women in our family made over Carl. He was because of his good looks, and so I didn't get that from the women in our family, and as did women generally when he grew up. And he was a very handsome guy, but right from the beginning, there were things about Carl that made me know that he was very special. Almost anything he touched turned to gold. He was good at it, almost anything he did. And he had that special charisma that when he walked into a room, he lit the room up. And that was what enabled him to be such an outstanding, charismatic type of politician. We never had real sibling rivalry. A part of it perhaps was because he loved politics and I loved the law. And so he pursued politics, I pursued the law, except when the year after he became mayor and it was agreed that I should run for Congress. And I understood at that time that he was the real politician in the family, and I had no problem accepting that. And I think he would have given me the same credit compared to the law that he would have yielded to me in terms of being the kind of a lawyer that we were. So we didn't have any real rivalry, and I never felt that I should be, I don't know how you put it, but the things that happened to him, I was proud of him. And so I was happy every time he did something. When he became the first black legislator in the state of Ohio as a Democrat, I was proud of that. That was my brother. When he became the mayor of Cleveland, I was proud of that. That was my brother. There's nothing for me to be envious about. And we were very close. Before he passed and during that period of our lives, he and I talked every day. And we had planned a little trip together right before he passed. And after he passed, it took a lot out of politics for me because without him around, and the things that we talked about and things that needed to be done and the way we strategized on different things, the way that we discussed what was happening in the nation, were things that were gone because he was no longer around. And that was a part of the reason, I think, that politics was no longer real fun for me.
Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you. Dee, it's a real pleasure.
For me too.
Thank you so much.